On Wednesday, the city of New York settled a class action lawsuit against its police department filed by Black Lives Matter protesters. The city of New York has agreed to pay out $13.7 million to 1,380 Black Lives Matter protesters who were unlawfully arrested and or beaten by New York City police. And this turns out to be the largest sum ever paid to protesters who suffered at the hands of police anywhere in the United States. This is a first. Now, study after study, including those conducted by the New York Times and the Washington Post, study after study demonstrates that the Black Lives Matter demonstrations immediately following the killing of George Floyd were all peaceful. Every single one of them were peaceful until the police showed up and began ramming their patrol cars into protesters, firing pepper spray indiscriminately, and smashing skulls with their batons. Study after study shows that whatever looting took place the looting was conducted by outside agitators with absolutely no ties to Black Lives Matter. And despite what Republicans insist, despite what you hear on Fox News, FBI Director Christopher Wray has testified under oath that Antifa is an ideology. As an organization, it doesn't exist. It is not an organized protest organization. Well, in making this settlement with the protesters, the New York City Police Department admits no wrongdoing. Yes, that's why they have to pay out close to, $13 million? Yeah, close to $14 million. But no wrongdoing, absolutely no wrongdoing. A civilian commission looking into police brutality here in New York City, a civilian commission looking into crimes committed by New York City police, concluded recently that it was next to impossible to prosecute the vast majority of police officers who engaged in violent misconduct during the Black Lives Matter protests because these police officers showed up to the Black Lives Matter protests with both their badge numbers and faces completely covered. In Los Angeles on Thursday morning, police officers fatally shot a man wielding a knife. Los Angeles police, as of this moment, refuse to say how many officers shot the man who was holding a knife, but witnesses on the scene say it was more than one officer who fired the gun at a man holding a knife. The suspect shot to death is said to have been in his 50s. A 50-year-old man with a knife versus several cops with guns. Why a kill shot? You can't shoot him in the legs? You can't tase him? You gotta go for the kill shot? Why is that? Well, apparently, from what I've been reading, police officers, especially in Los Angeles, have been trained. They've been told that if you're going to discharge your weapon, make it a kill shot. That's how they're trained, which explains why the Los Angeles Times, which keeps track of police killings in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Times reports that since the year 2000, Los Angeles police officers have shot to death more than 1,003 people. That's roughly one person shot to death each week in Los Angeles by a cop. On May 17th of this year, an 8-year-old migrant from Panama died while in the custody of Border Patrol agents down in Texas. Investigators working for the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol issued a report on Wednesday calling her death preventable, and they accused the Border Patrol officers of repeatedly ignoring her requests for medical help. This is an 8-year-old migrant who had come to America from Panama suffering from sickle cell anemia and a heart condition. Eventually, when her condition worsened, she was rushed to a hospital, but it was too late. She was already dead. According to this report, on the day the 8-year-old died, her mother had begged Border Patrol officers for a doctor at least 3 times. And an ambulance was only called after this 8-year-old girl went into cardiac arrest and lost consciousness. Only then, when she lost consciousness, was she taken to a hospital where she was pronounced dead. The National Football League has given Dan Snyder, owner of the Washington Commanders, permission to sell his team for $6 billion after Snyder agreed to pay a $60 million fine for sexually harassing a female employee, as well as hiding money from the NFL. The fine will be paid to the NFL. When Snyder purchased the team, back then it was called the Redskins, he paid $800 million. He got $6 billion for it this week. He was able to get $6 billion for it, of course, minus the 1% fine for creating a culture of sexual abuse and defrauding the NFL. An independent probe charges Snyder with financial misdeeds, withholding anywhere between $11 million and $44 million from the NFL under a revenue-sharing agreement. In order to level the playing field, that money he hid is supposed to be shared with other NFL teams, but Snyder has been accused of keeping 2 separate books. So as punishment, his $800 million investment has now been turned into a $6 billion windfall minus $60 million for the cost of doing business. The cost of being a pig. Pretty good. Pretty good. Steve Wynn, who once ruled the Las Vegas Strip, has settled a series of sexual misconduct complaints with the Nevada Gaming Control Board by paying a $10 million fine and agreeing never to work in the casino business again. Back in 2018, at the height of the Me Too movement, numerous allegations accusing Steve Wynn of sexual impropriety surfaced, and that prompted him to sell his Wynn Resorts International for a little over $2 billion, minus, of course, the $10 million fine for sexual misconduct. Wynn Resorts also was forced to pay a $20 million fine. The company had to pay a $20 million fine. It's the largest in the history of Nevada gaming. They had to pay the fine for their failure to respond to numerous complaints about Steve Wynn's sexually abusive behavior. $10 million fine. He sells his company for $2 billion, and the cost of doing business was $10 million. $10 million to sexually abuse and assault your female employees. Well, Mediate, it's a website that I go to, Mediate is reporting that conservative gun-toting, anti-LGBTQ professional Christian and white nationalist Steven Crowder, who is going through a miserable divorce. He's claiming his ex-spouse refused to act in a wifely manner, and that is why he refused to let her borrow the car while she was pregnant with his child. Anyway, Steven Crowder allegedly likes to expose himself to his male employees and share drugs. Percocet, this is according to an exclusive in Mediaite. Several employees have stepped forward claiming Steven Crowder creates an abusive workplace where screaming is the norm, along with Crowder unzipping his fly. Some of the employees maintain Steven Crowder exposes himself so often, you just kind of get used to it. Ehud Olmert is the former prime minister of Israel, and he has called on the United States and the world to boycott Israel in response to current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempts to reform his nation's judiciary. Last year, Olmert was ordered by a judge to pay Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife close to $30,000 for accusing them of being mentally ill. He accused Bibi Netanyahu and his wife of being mentally ill. Bibi took him to court, and he had to pay $30,000. Bibi Netanyahu is not mentally ill? Netanyahu, the far-right fascist prime minister of Israel, is currently pushing for judicial reform that would weaken the Supreme Court, giving him and the legislative branch more power to prevent the Supreme Court from striking down legislation that sober minds in the judiciary branch deem unconstitutional. Tens of thousands of Israelis are taking to the street protesting this judicial reform, which they say will give Netanyahu way too much power. Again, the former prime minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, is calling on America and the world to boycott Israel. Can't say that in America, by the way. You can say it in Israel, can't say it in America. Protesters in Tehran set fire to the Swedish embassy, and the Iranian government expelled the Swedish ambassador after a Swedish judge ruled that protesters could go ahead with plans to burn the Quran again. Because what else do you have to do, right? What other issues are there than burning the Quran? That's the best use of your time. In Sweden, it is up to the police to approve protests. And because there are no laws anymore in Sweden that prevent blasphemy, the Swedish police have approved several scheduled Quran burnings staged by far-right activists. Now, police recently in Sweden attempted to stop a Quran burning, saying it posed a threat to national security. But the order was overturned by the courts. The courts said, we have freedom of speech here, and if you want to burn the Quran, go ahead. But police now in Sweden are looking into whether or not they can charge these Quran burners with a hate crime. All that's going on in the world, and these guys have to burn the Quran. Can't you find something better to do? Like burn the American flag? Yevgeny Prigozhin, he's the head of the Wagner Group, the private army of Russian mercenaries. He is reportedly now living in Belarus and says his soldiers will no longer fight in Ukraine. If you remember, back in June, Prigozhin staged a 36-hour coup. He seized Russian government buildings, but then on the road to Moscow, he called it all off and negotiated a deal with Vladimir Putin to relocate himself and his troops to Belarus. Well, Prigozhin is reportedly back. He's back, and he's criticizing the Russian military once again, accusing them of wasting lives in Ukraine, calling the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, a fool's errand. After his failed coup, it is reported that Vladimir Putin met face-to-face with Prigozhin, where Prigozhin pledged his loyalty to Putin in exchange for Prigozhin being able to relocate to Belarus. Earlier yesterday morning, the head of the CIA, William Burns, was speaking in Aspen, where he told an audience that Vladimir Putin will eventually seek revenge for this mutiny. Our head of the CIA added that Prigozhin should watch his back and shouldn't fire his food taster. The head of the CIA is pretty much saying Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, is going to be killed by Vladimir Putin. Well, the war in Ukraine intensifies with Vladimir Putin threatening world famine by reneging on a promise to allow Ukrainian ships carrying wheat and fertilizer to pass through the Black Sea. If you remember last year, Putin agreed to a UN broker deal that allowed shipments of grain and food essentials from Ukraine to travel through the Black Sea unhindered. But this week, Putin pulled out of that deal, forcing the price of wheat to soar for 3 days straight. Ukraine provides much of Africa's fertilizer and grain, and should these shipments be blockaded by the Russian Navy, the UN says the number of Africans who will die from the subsequent famine would be incalculable. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said on Thursday that June was the planet Earth's hottest month ever recorded and warned that August is going to be worse. Scientists say the heat dome hovering over Texas is 5 times more intense because of climate change. They added that climate change is delivering an additional 5 degrees Fahrenheit to what in the past would be occasional heat waves that are now more frequent, more severe, and longer lasting. According to a brand new joint study conducted by Virginia Commonwealth University and the Center for American Progress, extreme heat from climate change is costing the United States so far $1 billion in excess medical costs each summer, and it will get more expensive each summer as climate change intensifies. The new study warns that this summer alone, 235,000 Americans will be forced to go to emergency rooms, with 56,000 staying overnight in hospitals due to medical conditions brought on by extreme heat. The study warns that people of color living in urban areas are especially susceptible to extreme heat because they lack air conditioning and shade from trees. The Teamsters warned that UPS and UPS drivers are negotiating but are unlikely to reach an agreement before the July 31st deadline, and that a strike is more likely than not, with 340,000 UPS drivers walking off their jobs on August 1st, creating the largest work stoppage in more than 50 years. The Teamsters are staging dress rehearsal practice pickets outside several key UPS facilities in order to show management they're ready to shut it all down. The head of the United Auto Workers has broken with other union chiefs by refusing to prematurely endorse Joe Biden for president in the 2024 elections. Shawn Fain is the newly elected president of the United Auto Workers, and he met with President Biden on Wednesday in the White House, but he still hasn't endorsed Biden for 2024. The United Auto Workers contracts with Detroit's big three automakers expires on September 14th, and the head of the UAW, Shawn Fain, says 150,000 auto workers are prepared to go on strike unless Biden and Detroit, the automakers, address problems in the federally funded conversion to electric vehicles. There is a problem switching over to electric because these vehicles, the electric vehicles, unlike gas-powered vehicles, require fewer workers, which means fewer jobs. Fain The head of the UAW reportedly told Biden that the federal government is subsidizing green energy, pouring billions into the auto industry. And so it's only fair that the workers get to participate in this windfall. The United Auto Workers are not only worried about fewer jobs in the automotive sector thanks to electric vehicles, they are also worried about the increase in non-union manufacturing jobs that are part of the electric vehicle supply chain. Tesla, for example, is non-union. He's building the cars in Texas. He moved out of Fremont. So that is why the AFL-CIO, unlike the AFL-CIO, the United Auto Workers has yet to give Joe Biden an endorsement. But Donald Trump says, give it to me. I'll take it. On Thursday, Donald Trump called on the United Auto Workers. On Thursday, Donald Trump called on the United Auto Workers to endorse him. Trump said only he can save the workers, the auto workers, and he'll do it by stopping Biden's headlong rush towards electric vehicles. He says Biden's greenhouse gas emission regulations are a disaster for auto workers. And Biden has instituted some new regulations that will result, they say, in 67% of all cars sold in America being electric by 2032. But Trump calls this a crippling mandate that destroys good union jobs, and that's why on Thursday, Donald Trump, Mr. Pro-Union, right, he urged the United Auto Workers to endorse him in 2024. He promises that under a Trump administration, Detroit will go back to making dirty cars that produce jobs and cancer. Something like, he said something like that. Well, Republican Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, has yet to endorse Donald Trump, and he is now denying that he ever made a secret promise to introduce a bill in the House that would expunge Donald Trump's 2 impeachments. Marjorie Taylor Greene says she is prepared to introduce a bill that would erase Trump's 2 impeachments, but such a bill makes no sense. The Constitution doesn't provide for the erasure of impeachments. An impeachment is merely an indictment that you send to the Senate for a trial. So you can't reverse an indictment. You can have a trial in the Senate and find Trump innocent, which is what happened. But you can't reverse those impeachments. That's a permanent stain on his record. Had Congress censured Trump, that could be reversed later. As I've mentioned on the show, Andrew Jackson, Trump's favorite president, was censured by the Whigs who controlled the Senate at the time. But when Democrats regained control of the Senate a few years later, they voted to overturn that censure. I think Jackson was a Democrat, right? I think. I'm tired, and I'm on pain medication. I'm pretty sure Andrew Jackson was a Democrat. We're expecting special counsel Jack Smith to indict Donald Trump for the role he played on January 6th. By the time you hear this, Trump might have already been told to report to a Washington, D.C. courtroom next week for his arrest. Meanwhile, a Manhattan judge on Wednesday, this is really important. This is really important. This should have been the first thing I talked about. A Manhattan judge on Wednesday ruled against Trump, who requested a new trial. Trump requested a new trial after a jury back in May found him civilly liable for sexually assaulting columnist E. Jean Carroll and then defaming her reputation. If you remember, and it's hard to keep track of all this, a jury awarded E. Jean Carroll $5 million. U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan on Wednesday told Trump's attorneys that despite what Donald Trump insists, this was not a miscarriage of justice. And then, and this is really important, Judge Kaplan said Donald Trump raped E. Jean Carroll. He didn't, this is what the judge said. He didn't sexually abuse E. Jean Carroll. He raped her. And that the jury concluded he raped her, because they've been playing fast and loose with what the jury decided, because let me read you what the judge said. He said that Donald Trump raped E. Jean Carroll in a Bergdorf Goodman changing room back in the mid-'90s. In his 59-page decision released on Wednesday, Judge Kaplan wrote, please pay attention to this, quote, "The finding that Ms. Carroll failed to prove that she was raped within the meaning of the New York penal law does not mean that she failed to prove that Mr. Trump raped her, as many people commonly understand the word rape." Judge Kaplan goes on to write, "Indeed, as the evidence at trial recounted below makes clear, the jury found that Mr. Trump, in fact, did exactly that." The presiding judge in E. Jean Carroll's defamation case not only told Trump on Wednesday, pay her the $5 million, you're not getting another trial, you don't understand the penal code, in the civil trial, the jury concluded you raped her. Ron DeSantis served as a JAG officer in Gitmo from March of 2006 to January of 2007. Vice has a program on Showtime, and back in May, they produced an episode that investigated allegations. We talked about this earlier in the year, allegations that Ron DeSantis, as a JAG officer serving at Gitmo, laughed as detainees were tortured and force-fed nutrients not through their mouth. And Vice sent a crew to Guantanamo Bay. They prepared a 30-minute episode for Showtime entitled "The Gitmo Candidate," right? Because Ron DeSantis is running as a veteran, never saw any action. Lawyer in between, took some time off from law school to go be a JAG officer at Gitmo. In the promotion for the upcoming episode of Vice on Showtime, Vice put out a press release. This is what it said. Seb Walker, their reporter, investigates allegations from former Guantanamo Bay detainees that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis witnessed acts condemned by the United Nations as torture during his past service at the controversial detention camp as a Navy JAG officer. That was how they promoted this episode for Showtime. But then a strange thing happened, right? Because I was looking forward to seeing this, right? Showtime refused to air the episode. According to reporting in The Hollywood Reporter and Semaphore, Showtime subscribers who tuned in on May 28th, expecting a Vice expose on possible war crimes committed by Ron DeSantis, well, instead they were treated to a rerun of the series Yellow Jackets. According to Semaphore, Showtime, which is owned by Paramount, they got cold feet. And they postponed the episode. They postponed the showing of the episode after Paramount's Washington lobbyist warned Showtime's top executives that there could be major consequences for Paramount down the line if they make an enemy out of Ron DeSantis. We've known this year that Disney is paying a bit of a price because they made an enemy of Ron DeSantis. So Paramount, which owns Showtime, got cold feet and pulled Vice's expose on possible war crimes committed by Ron DeSantis. Now, Showtime refuses to comment. They're saying that they have yet to decide when and if they're ever going to run this episode. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis rarely discusses his time spent as a JAG officer at Gitmo. He likes to say he wore the uniform, and that's, he was a JAG officer. Tom Cruise wore the JAG officer uniform in A Few Good Men, but he didn't see any action. Neither did Ron DeSantis, except for inmates being tortured. That's what Ron DeSantis, that's the action he saw. He admits, in an interview with the Washington Post years ago, Ron DeSantis admitted that he witnessed detainees at Gitmo staging hunger strikes. He witnessed riots and several suicides that he investigated as a JAG officer. DeSantis has admitted to advising guards at Gitmo that they could legally force feed prisoners who were staging hunger strikes. Legally? I don't think so. The UN Human Rights Commission said it regarded the force feeding of prisoners on Gitmo as torture. It has now been revealed that the CIA, by the way, it was the CIA at Gitmo that was doing the torturing. It is Ron DeSantis as a JAG officer at Gitmo who made his CIA connections by keeping his mouth shut. It has now been revealed that the CIA's practice of force-feeding prisoners at Gitmo, as well as at other black sites like in Thailand, it involved the force-feeding. It sounds kind of anodyne, doesn't it? They're starving to death. We're going to force-feed them. It sounds humanitarian. It's not. It involves a tube, and it involves a process known as rectal rehydration, as well as rectal feeding. Expert witnesses in several trials and in testimony given before Congress have testified there is no medical value to rectal rehydration or rectal feeding. There is no medical value, and they say the entire purpose of this type of force feeding that went on Gitmo, the entire purpose of this is to torture a detainee, to keep torturing them until they start eating solid food again. It's just torture. At the time, the CIA insisted, as did Ron DeSantis, who was a JAG officer overseeing this torture. At the time, the CIA and Ron DeSantis insisted this was, quote, a sound medical procedure, right? But the group Physicians for Human Rights has condemned the practice, calling it sexual assault masquerading as medical treatment. Now, Vice probably was going to tell you all this on May 28th, but Showtime killed the story. Maybe you should cancel your subscription to Showtime. Are you really getting news from Showtime? Ron DeSantis is a fascist. He is a sadist and an idiot. Today, he said on Fox that he's going to look into whether or not the pension fund that handles state employees in Florida, whether or not the pension fund should divest itself of any investments in Bud Light because of its pro-transgender agenda, right? Meanwhile, last year, he passed into law a bill forbidding Florida pension funds for state workers, forbidding them from divesting their investments from oil stocks, right? He's ordered the pension funds of Florida to continue to invest in oil companies by law. Pension funds in Florida are not allowed to divest themselves of fossil fuel companies, thanks to Ron DeSantis' law. But today, Ron DeSantis said he is going to look into whether or not he's going to ban pension funds for Florida state workers, ban them from investing in Bud Light because of its pro-transgender agenda. This is as satanic and fascistic as you can get. This is right out of the fascist playbook. I got to wrap it up. And I'm going to talk again tomorrow about the fascist playbook. They're working off a script that's been used since the 1930s. There are about 7 plays that authoritarians utilize. One of them is torturing members of the LGBTQ community. That's part of the fascist playbook. It dates back to the 30s in Germany, Italy, and Spain. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Before I go, please like this video, please. It means you'll see more of me if you like it. That's how it seems to work. So please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. If you want to help me, if you want to thank me, the best way to help is to share this. I say this at the end of every episode because it's true. This is a grassroots effort. And the best way to thank me and support me is to copy and paste the link to this episode and share it on social media and email with your friends. That is the single best way to help. Please comment. I read all the comments. You know I read the comments. If you know whether or not Andrew Jackson was a Democrat, please let me know. I'll look it up, but I always appreciate it when my audience corrects me. And if you're a longtime listener and you read the comments, you'll see that the show is informed by what people write in the chat room and in the comment section. So thank you for leaving comments. And thank you to all the moderators in the chat room who keep the conversation civilized. This is a gated community. We don't allow garbage people to espouse garbage ideas. So thank you to the moderators. That covers everything. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling better. Take care of somebody. You want to feel better? Take care of somebody. I promise you. The only cure to your malaise is taking care of somebody else. So go take care of somebody. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. And if you want to take care of yourself and feel better, take care of somebody else.